So Kelly, let me ask you something. If the government has been giving us food guidelines for over 40 years, why are we sicker than ever?
We went from the food pyramid telling us to eat 6 to 11 servings of grains a day to MyPlate with half fruits, half vegetables, a little protein, and some dairy on the side. And yet the rates of diabetes, obesity, and metabolic syndrome kept climbing.
So today we're going to ask the question, did the pyramid fail us? Is the plate actually better, or are both missing something very critical?
And guys, here's the truth. Guidelines are built for populations, but health is built for individuals.
And if you're over 50, if you care about muscle, brain health, blood sugar, and actually enjoying the next 20 years of your life, the conversation and this conversation matters.
So today we're going to break down what the food pyramid got wrong and what MyPlate improved and what truly metabolically healthy plate should look like.
This isn't about bashing the system. It's about understanding it so you can make better decisions for your body. So let's dig in. Let's first talk about the history of the food pyramid. I couldn't believe it when we were researching, right, Kelly? Like the other day we were sitting there talking like the food pyramid, 1992 to 2011.
Yeah.
And what was on the food pyramid?
I feel like they started making recommendations in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And I think the 80s was when we got our first food pyramid, right? But to your point, it was all grain based. The whole bottom floor of that pyramid was grain.
And then the top was fats and oils that they said, oh, just use them sparingly. And right in the mid was protein and, like you said, a little sprinkle of dairy. Or dairy, it makes your body feel good. And then the whole milk mustache. Yeah.
So there was a lot to unpack with the original food pyramid and then the transition over to MyPlate. I think the MyPlate thing was made to keep it simpler. I think they were seeing, hey, people are not eating the way we're recommending anyway. So I think that transition from pyramid to MyPlate was kind of to keep it simple. And I think simple is better. And then what we have that came out in 2026, where everything was flipped on its head, right? We got a pyramid on its head. And I think that was intentional. I think that was to say, hey, we got to do something different.
Yeah. Yeah. And we had that in between, right? Which is the MyPlate, which divided it up on this cute little plate, right? Into little sections of the plate, fruits and vegetables and grains and protein and dairy. And the question is that we hear all the time is like, who actually wins? What's right? And is there actually a right and a wrong? What is it? What do you say to that when you get asked that question?
Yeah, it kind of makes you scratch your head and lean back and think about why were these written in the first place? The first iteration of recommendation for our food had to do with food production, and it had to do with feeding the world, not what Americans really needed to be healthy.
Right.
And what we see, anytime these guidelines come out, we see industries start really promoting the foods that are recommended and not in a processed way.
Yeah.
Right. So what I loved about 2026 was we're talking about real whole food. But that doesn't matter that we're talking about it because industry is still doing what industry does. So I've seen on the internet, these little packets of protein, right? They're gummies that are heavy in protein that are being promoted to help improve protein intake, right? And I know I'm getting ahead of myself talking about what's here now, but I'm just saying, even back in the day when these recommendations for all these grains, what happened?
Yeah.
We had all these cereals that came out. So all of a sudden, cereal was a healthy breakfast with all of this loaded carbohydrates that were highly processed and refined, and then added sugar over time.
Right. And a pyramid, it also, besides the excessive grains, there became this huge fat phobia, right?
Well, that happened, in the late 80s? The fat phobia, everything became
90s.
fat-free.
Yeah.
I remember getting a T-Factor book that was all about, controlling fat consumption. So fat became the enemy. And I remember those interim cakes. Do you remember the fat-free cakes? Do you remember those? I ate that every day because it was fat-free, right? Yep. And it had grain in it. So, that's got to be healthy, right?
Yeah. And then the whole sugar-free craze. Oh, pull sugar out, but just put the artificial stuff in there because that's going to be better for you because that's less in calories. And now, I think we understand that no matter what happens, and going back to your point, is industry looks at this and goes, how can we capitalize?
How can we profit?
How can we profit from that? Mm-hmm. And, I think it's just so important to understand in all of these different eras how there were certain things that it brought attention to food, which that part is important. But unfortunately, it definitely created confusion of consumers and the challenge and actually the scary part is there became no differentiation between processed food and whole foods. None. So they weren't talking about quality of food at all.
Right. And I think the message has been less sugar. We've been watching this freight train of momentum build for metabolic dysfunction for many, many years. Mm-hmm. This is not a new problem, but it is a catastrophic problem that we're facing today. And I think the pandemic, I'm just going to call it, created such awareness around people that were metabolically unstable and the impact that having an insult like a virus could do to the body, right? So I think our awareness around hearing the value of whole food is very different today than, say, it was 6 years ago. Would you agree with that, Lori?
I do agree with that. And it needed to happen because what we did see, as you say, in the pandemic is people that were metabolically dysregulated, history of a poor glucose metabolism, hypertension, high cholesterol, and quite frankly, those that didn't even know, right? They were in that state of dysfunction, not necessarily disease. Their outcomes were far worse during that time period. Yeah. So, I think that we needed more attention to nutrition and nutrient value. Nutrient density of food, quality of food, more awareness to it. So what did the pyramid get all wrong? Excessive grains, like fat phobia, no differentiation between processed and whole foods, and no metabolic individuality. And then the plate came along. What MyPlate, right, improved was visual simplicity. That plate was cool, right? It was, I think it's far better than the pyramid, personally. Maybe it's because I'm a visual person. I liked it.
I did too. And I have patients ask me all the time, what should my plate look like? I don't know if you get that question, but I love that question. Like, what should my plate look like? Because that's something that's practical. It's something we can anchor onto, and it's something that we can really help, navigate.
And so the simplicity of it, and then they did emphasize more vegetables, which we know is so important to overall health and well-being. Not necessarily quality, again, but definitely more vegetables and getting, more fiber with those vegetables, but, and also portion awareness. I think that's something that MyPlate did get right too, or at least improved it, right? But what it still missed was it didn't talk about, again, quality ultra processed foods, insulin response to certain foods, glycemic load, again, individualization. I think we try to take a food plan and try to make it right for every decade. Everyone. This is right for everyone. And I think what you and I have learned over our combined experience in food first clinics, regenerative, nutritional, holistic practice is that there is not one way. There are core foundational principles of eating whole food, farm to plate, eating nutrient dense foods, sourcing well. But we also know throughout the seasons of life, how we need to eat, what we need to eat, how much of it we need to eat, even the timing of our food. That changes over the seasons of the years, but that also changes with the seasons that we walk through. And women, we're a perfect example of that. We have lots of seasons, don't we?
Lots of opportunity for change, right? Lots of seasons. Yeah, and then when we're in a healing phase, we may need to eat in a particular way versus when we're not necessarily in a healing phase, but the bottom line, whole food nutrition wins every time. And we need to remember that is the foundation of what we need to be pursuing. And I wanted to read a little bit about, I pulled the guidelines, and I do want to make sure that we put these in the show notes for people to reference back to. But it says, to make America healthy again, we must return to the basics. American households must prioritize diets built on whole, nutritional, dense food, protein, dairy, vegetables, fruit, and healthy fats. I would have balked at the dairy in the past of being there, but with the advent of the awareness around C15, I do think that dairy has its place. There are some of us that are dairy sensitive that really shouldn't eat dairy for metabolic reasons and immune reasons. But if you're not dairy sensitive, doing organic, full fat dairy, it has a place in the diet, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's sourcing matters.
Sourcing matters. Yeah.
Sourcing matters. And go back to C15 for those that don't know about C15. And we have an episode that will have aired or will be airing. You'll have to check it out. But it's on a particular molecule, if you will, C15, that is from and sourced from, it's a saturated fat. And it has so much promise in relationship to improving overall metabolic syndrome. And so I would have balked as well. I'm still very cautious, very, very cautious. Because for here in the United States, it is very, very hard for us to source clean dairy.
So true. So true.
Yeah.
So knowing your sourcing and knowing your metabolic status to know how should you be eating in the proper ratios, I think is important too.
Yeah. And this is where all of, some of the things we just consistently reinforce is whole foods, non-GMO, organic when possible, less of the processed, ultra processed, and none would be better. But we don't live in a bubble, and we do live, we live. And also protein prioritization. I do think that it is very, very important to prioritize. The standard American diet is awful, high carbohydrates, low protein. And then on top of it, unfortunately, when protein is chosen, it's not quality protein. And to your point, now with the food industry, everything's about protein, and you'll pick up a bar, that's supposedly protein, and you look at it, it has more sugar. It doesn't have a whole lot of protein in it. And the type of protein that is in it and the other oils that are in it, it's not healthy at all.
Or detrimental. And what I'm also seeing, on the market is a lot of meat substitutes that are high protein, right? And so again, thinking through the lens of, is that food processed? So let's talk about what is a processed food. Let's just get that simple. So what would you say, Lori? How would you define a processed food?
Yeah. So any food that's been changed in any way from its natural source, so it's when we say whole food, and we don't even say our preference isn't even minimally processed. It's not processed. So whole food, farm to plate.
And it is the ingredient. Mm-hmm. It is the ingredient. And then there are minimally processed foods. So there's a lot of convenience foods today where you're going to the market and you're picking up, say, celery that's already been washed and chopped. You're picking up vegetables that are in a medley that's already been washed and ready. And I see a lot of consumers buying those things for convenience. They're easy to throw in a pan and cook. Those have been minimally processed. So we have to think about how long has it been there? As it sits and as it's been managed, it has lost some of its nutrient value. So we're going to get more density from foods that are truly whole foods, right?
And it's so important. You speak of the time thing from harvesting to your plate. The less time there is between those two, the more nutrient density that will have. And of course, how you cook it changes that too. And kind of talking about the convenience of things and just even, disease states or levels of dysfunction that some people have to eat. They don't tolerate raw, they have to cook. And so then what would that look like? So, but thinking about just the sourcing of food and the food as a whole, the metabolic plate, what would you say the ideal metabolic plate would be for most? Or do you have that?
Yeah, I don't know that I have that in my head. What I would say is that fiber is important. And I don't think we talk about fiber enough. And we typically will get that if we're getting 9 to 13 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And that's hard to get. We need about 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day. What I would say about that is if your GI tract is a little bit of a mess, you may not tolerate that right away. And so working your way up to that, and even getting the vegetable composition and working your way up to that. Definitely protein. And I think protein with every meal for most people to stabilize blood sugar, make sure that we're absorbing. And we have a capacity for absorption. And so if we're eating just all of our protein in one meal, we're not absorbing all of that. And so we need to break it up into servings so that we can get maximum absorption to build muscle and have some structural integrity, right? I do think quality fats are important.
For sure.
We need fat in the diet. So olive oil, avocado, if you can tolerate, nuts and seeds, things like that, that really have other nutrients in them as well, minerals, to support that healthy fat consumption. I think if we have a healthy gut, that would be kind of what I would recommend that we prioritize.
Yeah. And no mandatory dairy.
Right. Not mandatory dairy.
No. And no ultra processed or processed would be best. But again, it's looking at, that whole bad, better, best. Yep. And making choices that are more often best or better,
Yeah, we recognize you guys are busy. Life is hectic at times, and we're running from one thing to the other. We have events, we're eating out. And so we're saying no processed foods, right? That would be ideal. That would be the best possible way to eat. And I say control what you can control. Control what you have at home. Control what you buy, those packages that you buy and the foods that you buy at home. Meal prep some to make it easier. What would you say, Lori, about just the convenience aspect of getting the food?
Well, we are busy, and we're gonna, that whole eating out versus eating in. I think sometimes people think it's easier to eat out. And the reality is that we kind of get into almost a rhythm of doing that. And there are so many food delivery sources now that make eating home easier, and they can be quality. So step back, evaluate the areas that, of all of these things we've listed today, if there's one area for yourself that would be the biggest lever you could pull right now. And I would say that if that lever for you is, it's a time issue, it's look at the other things that are available out there that can make things more convenient, but not less healthy. And I use Green Chef. I know Sunbasket. Some people use Sunbasket. Some people, there's so many different options out there now. We don't have to resort to eating out.
That's right. I've used Methodology. I've used Green Chef before.
Yeah.
So I do think that we've got more than we've ever had to make pulling off a whole food based diet easier. So true enough, step back, look at your resources and see what that provides.
And I want to go back to one other, thing that I would say that really constitutes a metabolic plate, and a recommendation is recognizing that it has to be personalized for your age, for your hormones, for your blood sugar, for, your age and stage, if you will. And that's where working with a qualified healthcare practitioner is helpful, because after you've done some of these changes, it's digging deeper into your current metabolic status. And then using food, truly. Food is medicine. It's powerful medicine. And so these guidelines are intended just as that. They're guidelines. They're guidelines, but be intuitive. Be intuitive. Like, when you eat particular foods, how do they make you feel? That's extremely important to think about, too.
So I want to go back to the conversation a little bit on protein, because I think this is a really important conversation to have. A lot of the backlash that has been talked about from these current guidelines was the increase in protein recommendations. And the argument was that Americans already get too much protein, which I'm thinking, what are they looking at? I'm just confused by that. Are you confused by that?
I am baffled by that. I mean, what person coming into your clinic, just asking the question, what person have you had, or number of people have you had coming in already getting ample protein?
Very little. Very few of my population is getting adequate protein.
Yeah.
And so I was confused by that statement, confused by that concern, we know that our protein needs go up as we age to preserve lean muscle mass. And so I feel like absorption of protein goes down as we age. That's what I see in my practice. And maybe my subset of patients have more gut challenges, perhaps. I get that. Yeah. But I would say they're the average American people. And typically the absorption does go down as we age, which makes it more important that we focus on quality proteins to preserve muscle mass.
And the pushback on protein I hear a lot is if I get more protein, I've always heard that it's going to create kidney disease. And I always banter back or ask the question of, if you pull back on protein, what are you going to eat? And normally it's more carbohydrates. And if you think about that through the lens of the relationship of food to one of the major causes of kidney disease, which is diabetes.
Elevated blood sugar, yes.
Right? So what ends up happening is, so who wins? What is better? And the reality is eating more quality protein and having a nice, well-distributed plate, if you will, with good quality vegetables and healthy fats. That's a win for your kidneys every time.
And then monitor. Whatever changes you make, monitor your biometrics over time to see what is happening with your kidney function. That's really the best way to know.
Yeah. So, metabolic nuance is there. There's always individuality that has to be remembered. I'm going to go back to they're guidelines. And those guidelines are, when we say what is the most ideal way of looking at your nutrition is whole food, farm to plate, non-GMO, organic, nutrient-dense diet. And that doesn't get enough attention. Do you agree, Kelly?
Yeah. So to your point earlier, the length of time from when something is harvested to when it's on your plate dictates the nutrient density. So leaning on your farmers markets, leaning on your local farmers to help with some of your nutrition, I think is really important too. We mentioned some food delivery places. Obviously, that's not local and organic. That's not all of what we would eat if we're ordering that. If you do Green Chef probably 3 days a week, and then you have other things other days. So it's part of that diet. It's still whole food based organic, but not necessarily, close by.
Right. Yeah. So the other question I get a lot is, because it was the food pyramid, right? Originally is whole grains and being so heart healthy. So when you have a person that has that ingrained, how do you speak to that?
That is a hard one because I think oatmeal has done such a tremendous job in making themselves known for being heart healthy. Right? Yes. I mean, what am I going to do? What is my heart going to do without oatmeal? Yes. And so, we have the fortunate opportunity to be measuring inflammatory markers. So we can actually look and see, is that food creating inflammation for a given person? And I can say most of the time it is, right? Most of the time that grain is creating a burden of inflammation that's not helping anyone. And so I try to take it back to what is their body telling us, right? Because it's an N of one. We're not looking at the population. What does the population need? The other question I get beyond heart health is fiber. How am I going to get my fiber if I'm not consuming grains? And, there's all of your fruits and vegetables. I mean, I think about an apple is really rich in fiber. So there's plenty of opportunity to get fiber in, and we should be eating those vegetables anyway.
That's right. Seeds and nuts. There's so many other alternatives, and grains as a whole, unfortunately, are very pro-inflammatory. And a lot of the reason it's not just, it's what our food industry has done, right? Yeah. So it's what our food industry has done to the grains. And in many cases, particularly wheat, it's, indigestible, gluten is to many. But also it's not just the indigestibility, it's also the spray and the chemicals and the things like that our crops, unfortunately, and grains and have exposure to. So yeah, I'm with you. I was a runner. You were too, right? We ate oatmeal
carbs. I can't tell you how many Fig Newtons I had as a runner. Super easy to grab and go.
That's right.
A little bit of grain, a little bit of figs. So yeah, we've been there. We've done that.
Yeah.
And we know now the inflammatory burden that can create over time.
So why does no one talk about insulin in government guidelines? Have you thought about that?
Insulin's not even something that we talk about in primary care. Right. And so we're not even measuring. I mean, patients coming into me, I don't know about you, Lori, but they've never had their insulin checked.
But they've had their hemoglobin.
They've had their hemoglobin A1C checked. Right.
They had their glucose.
Yeah. But no one's looking at fasting insulin or 2-hour postprandial insulin levels. And so I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed. Right. But I'm not surprised that it's not something that's being looked at, because I don't think it's being measured for most people.
Yeah. So true. So true. So, the pyramid fed the population. You said it earlier. The plate simplified it, but neither optimizes it. None of them do. And I think you kind of led us to this earlier. These guidelines are very much averages, and health has to be personal. It's very individualized. There are core foundational principles that we all should be adhering to, but how we apply them over the seasons does have to change to get the outcomes that we want. And those outcomes are, living a more anti-inflammatory lifestyle and promoting vitality, hormone balance, mobility, brain optimization, and all the things to just live not longer, to live better. To live better. So if you want to live long enough to enjoy retirement, you need more than MyPlate. You agree?
I agree. And listen, she said, if you want to live long in retirement and enjoy retirement, right? Not just live long to retire, but actually enjoy retirement, right? We want to be strong. That's the message. We really want to be strong. And your foundation of nutrition is is going to dictate your strength and your agility as you age. And so it's not too young to start making these changes, and make 1 or 2 changes at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself with making all the changes. We can be obsessive about what we're doing too. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about just getting back to the foundation. Keep food simple, enjoy it, slow down when you're eating, talk to your family while you're eating.
Bring in those senses, smell it, look at it, just slow down. We chew it. We rush into mealtime, and none of those things are addressed in the guidelines. But those are the things that we need to, in addition to understanding those, what to eat. It's how we also eat it.
I think it was a good attempt. I think this last iteration was a good attempt at bringing some awareness to whole food-based eating and getting rid of processed foods completely. But my concern is we're all subject to marketing. And so those marketing messages that you're going to see with eat more protein, take this supplement, are around consumerism. And so just be aware that that's not holding consistent with what the true guidelines are. So as we wrap up today, super excited to be here with you guys. As always, we're going to put the most updated guidelines in our show notes for you guys to peruse, and send us some questions back. Let us know what you want to be hearing about. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
The Synergee podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.